Hey TV fans, and welcome to the world of the Upside Down and Stranger Things. And your hosts for this ride is going to be Board Now and Rachel McDonald. We are back. We're starting a new TV show. And the reason for this is because, of course, we're not too far away from season 4 of Stranger Things hitting Netflix very soon, late May, in fact. So, Stranger Things, season 1, episode 1, chapter 1. I'll try and remember the chapter every time. And the first episode is called The Vanishing of Will Byers, which, of course, gives you a nice little setup to sort of what the episode is about, or the hook of the episode, if you like. So, yeah, I don't have to do much introduction to Stranger Things, really. Unless you've been living under a rock. I think you know the premise. Even if you've never seen it, I think you would know the premise and sort of what it's about. But obviously, big 80s nostalgia type teen sci-fi series is the best way to sum it up. You've obviously got classic Spielberg-style imagery with the lead characters sort of riding along on the bikes, but so crucially it is like a mix of sci-fi and like a teen show. That the younger characters and the teen characters very important to driving the drama. And so with the debut season, which started in 2016 on Netflix, the crucial sort of part of it was the introduction of the upside down world and what exactly was going on with the scientists and their sort of weird little experiments, but also the disappearance of Will Byers, the Kins, Indiana, which is again very, similar to a lot of small town settings that we've had in sort of classic Spielberg things or like Carpenter movies, that kind of thing. And his group of friends, Dustin, for example, Mike, Lucas, that's Will, mysteriously disappears. And you also follow his mother, played by Winona Ryder, who this was a bit of a comeback for her, really. And she has a big role to play as like a single parent. He's also got like an older brother, Jonathan, and you get some other characters. You get like the character of Nancy and her boyfriend, Steve. And Nancy's brother is, of course, Mike, local sheriff Hopper. Played brilliantly. David Harbour.
There we go.
A wonderful David Harbour. Are your memories of first watching Stranger Things when it hit in 2016?
I remember not knowing what the frack was going on. I was just saying this to Stephen when we were rewatching it. I was like, remember when we watched this show and we had no idea what the hell was going on at all? Like, it takes a good 5 episodes before you start to get any answers. So I remember when I first watched this in 2016, just being so sucked in, because the first episode's a great example of, just how well it sucks you in, but also being so confused and just wanting to know what the hell was going on. And I remember that the mystery unfolds so well that I remember just being completely gripped by this series. I think we watched it over 2 nights, so we finished it really quickly. And I just remember being completely sucked in and completely riveted, because all I wanted to know was what was happening at like every single moment in time. It was like, what is going on here? And I just remember loving getting the little bits, pieces by pieces, and finding out, what was going on. So that was my clearest memory, just being sucked in, but also not knowing what the hell was going on at any given time. What about you? Did you first watch this when it first aired in 2016, or did you watch a little later?
No, I did watch it when it aired. I remember it quite well, because I just remember seeing a trailer for it, and I thought, this looks pretty decent. Obviously, I didn't have expectations, and it's one of those funny things. Always, when you look back, very rarely do you see something or like a trailer of something, and you can predict that it's going to become such a big hit and pop culture phenomenon, because obviously Stranger Things is definitely one of the biggest shows of our times, really, our modern sort of era. Did put Netflix on the map as like a serious sort of streaming type service, like producing their own like content. I think House of Cards was their first big show, but I would say Stranger Things sort of took it to like the next level in a way, and really have that many expectations, just doesn't it look decent? And I mean, like you, I just got hooked along and I was into it from the start. And I think what you're talking about, not knowing what was going on, but slowly things coming together, I think that's crucial in the fact that they are like chapters, they're sort of title chapters, because that's the feel they're going for. They're sort of recreating sort of older type fiction and storytelling. It's something which obviously modern TV gets compared to a lot. It is more like a novel where you have episodes as like chapters almost. And I think Stranger Things does a really good job in doing what a great chapter of a novel should do, in a way where you sort of end each chapter or each episode, in this case, on a hook normally, but at the same time it still feels like a proper like satisfying meal sort of thing, but you still end on like a cliffhanger, or you end on what's going to happen next, that kind of thing.
The chapter is like its own. So it's like its own story, but it's its own story within the bigger story, and like you said, every chapter ends on a hook. And I think this first episode in particular really demonstrates that. It's such a strong opener to this season, I think.
And I think also it's worth saying then, like in this first episode as well, there's a couple of tense scenes and a couple of suspenseful scenes that are actually pretty scary. So I think it does get that good balance where it's more than just a teen show, and you've obviously got a very entertaining script, likable characters, but it balances that out where there are sort of stakes and there are like suspense. Obviously, as it goes on and you get into the characters more, the stakes become more important. But I think from this first episode, it is well directed with a good sort of suspenseful atmosphere in the bits it needs to have, sort of thing. So I think when the scene where Will first disappears, which I think is like the bit just before the titles, isn't it? He's obviously
fantastic sequence.
He comes back home. He's being chased by something, which obviously he doesn't know what it is, and he's sort of screaming out for his mum. They're not around.
Fantastic scene where we see that the lab guy. So we just get this shot of his lab, and there's a guy running through the lab, and he's obviously running from something, and it's very dark and atmospheric. And then he gets into the elevator, and then there's that great moment where the slime drips onto his shoulder, and then he looks up and he's all of a sudden grabbed out of the elevator by something horrifying. And again, this is what I'm talking about, like, you don't know what's going on at all, but you are so intrigued because you just want to know, we're laying the groundwork for all the conspiracy and everything that will come later. So I think that's a great scene. And then of course the scene where Will is chased. I like the setup of using the Dungeons and Dragons, because we see the 4 kids playing Dungeons and Dragons, and then they kind of take the names of the bad things from this game, and the game itself is almost like a metaphor for what's actually happening in the real world. And that scene where Will goes missing, it's such a great scene. Now, we all know, because I've talked about it many times on this channel, that I'm not the biggest fan of the 80s, but this series, I think, does very much feel to me like those 80s movies that I used to love as a kid. So things like E.T. and The Goonies and Stand By Me. It has that feel, and I think it has it right from the beginning of this episode. It kind of, now, I actually said to Stephen, I'm like, when I reference this, Keith's going to want to punch me in the face because I keep bringing up this movie, but it reminds me a little bit of when I watched Halloween Kills. Stay with me, and we were watching the flashbacks in the 70s, and it didn't feel like it was trying to say this is the 70s. It actually felt like it had been filmed in the 70s, like with 70s style cameras and using the kind of cinematography that you used back then. I get that feeling when I watch this season. It feels to me not like they're trying to emulate the 80s, but that they literally have filmed it in the 80s. It feels like a young, like a kid's show from the 80s. Like I get such a big E.T. and Goonies vibe when I watch this series. And I think like right from the first episode, everything about it, from the bikes, which is such a obvious like Spielberg reference, to the score. The score is fantastic, to just the atmosphere. And I feel like, and we'll talk about this more as we get into the later seasons, but I do feel like they lose this a little bit in the later seasons, and it becomes more about like, let's prove that we're in the 80s, whereas this is just so seamlessly feels like one of those 80s adventure movies. It's just so well done. And that's the vibe I get when I watch it. And like going back and watching it again yesterday, like that's what I was feeling again. Those kind of fun 80s movies, kids movies, especially very, very Spielberg influenced.
Seasons is, I think it actually explores different parts of the 80s and different themes and other stuff. And obviously there's just so many pop culture references. So I guess it does broaden things out as well. So I think that's something that it has in its favour. But obviously, I really agree with you. I definitely think it feels like an authentic sort of kids experience, kids like movie. And obviously the references are all there. Now, obviously, a bit later on, I think, as it does expand on its universe and stuff. So, for example, in season 3, I think it does feel more like it's like referencing like Carpenter or like Cronenberg, like body horror. So that was something, and that's to talk about when we get to season 3. But I mean, that is something which I personally loved about that season, because I enjoy that stuff quite a bit. But yeah, I agree with you. I think the look of this is on point. I think the kids speak very naturally. They do sound like legitimately what sort of young, preteens or teens would sound like, and the way they interact. And then obviously one of the fun things about the show is that they are proactive. So in this first episode, when they find out that Will's missing initially, because the suspense builds a bit throughout the day, where at first they think he just hasn't shown up to school for whatever reason. But as things go on, obviously it dawns on them that they should have heard from him by now, so that they are a bit more concerned. So they actually take it into their own hand, because one of the things with Hopper in the first episode is that I think certainly Joyce doesn't think he's taking it seriously enough. And that's a bit of a sense maybe with some of the others. Now, they do conduct search parties, but one thing I do like is that the kids are very proactive. I mean, once they hear them they suspect that their best friend is missing and something's probably up here, they do actually take it upon themselves to go searching. And they are treated actually a little bit smarter than you might typically sort of think.
Yeah, definitely.
So, do you want to comment on some of the characters? Are there any sort of standout characters? Or
I think, look, I found this time around, because I actually haven't watched this show I haven't watched season 1 in a good 4 or 5 years. It's been a long time. And I found that all I wanted to do, the kids are so young. They're so little. I think the older I get, and I don't know if this is a universal thing, but the older I get, anytime I go back and watch a show that has young protagonists, I find myself getting more and more protective of them. So as I was watching this, all I wanted to do was just take every tiny little kid and just wrap them up in a blanket and keep them safe. I think this first episode does a great job of establishing all the characters. I think each of the kids has their own persona. You find out right off the bat that Will is a little shyer, Dustin's a bit of a smart mouth, Lucas is a bit cynical and suspicious, and Mike is a caregiver, and Mike is obviously the leader. And I think they do a really good job of establishing that. I agree with you that the kids are very natural. Child actors can be very hard to work with. It can be hard to find, obviously, because they're kids, they don't have life experience to draw on. But so when you do get a cast that has not 1, not 2, not 3, but 5 fantastic kid actors, like that that says a lot. And of course, you have Millie Bobby Brown in her breakout role. We haven't talked about, of course, they find the mysterious girl, 11. Now, she in particular, I had a very hard time dealing with how little she is and how young she is, and she's so sad and she's so lost, and oh my god, all I wanted to do was like protect her because she's just a little baby. I think as I get older I just get more and more like maternal and instinctive and just want to protect these kids. But I think that this episode does a great job of establishing all the characters, the teen characters too. We get introduced to Nancy, to Jonathan, to Steve. I love Steve. We're going to talk so much about Steve Harrington over these episodes because oh my god, I love Steve Harrington.
Yeah. There's a lot to talk about.
There is. And I think that watching it in retrospect, you can see the building blocks for the characterization that will come later. I like how even now in the first episode, Steve is slightly subverting your expectations of him. Like, he climbs through Nancy's window and you think he's going to be a dick when he tries to go a little bit further than she's comfortable with. But instead he backs off. He makes a joke about, he's like, bad Steve. And then he just goes back to studying with her. Like, even here, you can see that he's not quite that, like, you expect him to be the kind of, typical 80s, smarmy dude out of like Pretty in Pink or 16 Candles, but he's not. They're already subverting his character, and I love that. You see that Nancy is obviously trying to find herself a little bit. She's at that age where, she's not quite sure who she wants to be or where she wants to go, and her character is going to obviously grow a lot. And I think the adults get established really well. I love the establishment of Jim Hopper. Jim Hopper is such a great character, like just so fantastic. And I love that we sorry, you're gonna say?
Well, he's classic sort of shrubby type, and obviously he has quite a good growth because in this he has his own ways, and you sort of think, well, is this guy really taking things seriously? And it's obviously a credit to the character and the performance, and over times you see, this guy actually does know what he's doing. He's actually quite an effective, sheriff. It's just that he doesn't always show it, and sometimes it's his style to be quite sort of cynical or to be, appearing to be quite sort of shrubby and like laid back and not taking things too seriously, and there's some funny lines with him in this stuff, like the line about when he says it's Hawkins, the most serious thing that ever happened here was like, he says like an owl or an eagle or something attacking his hair because it thought it was a nest or something. And there's lines about mornings are for donuts.
I love the coffee and contemplation.
That's low. So he's a great character. Delivery and stuff is absolutely glorious.
And I absolutely love that you see him wake up, have some pills, have a beer, have some more pills, and then okay, time to go to work. And work is the sheriff. This is our sheriff, popping pills and guzzling beer. But then obviously you get a little bit of
that's true, because with the opening, you wouldn't necessarily have thought he was the sheriff.
He was the sheriff, no.
Yeah. So that's really funny too.
So that's fantastic. David Harbour is just so great. But I like that even though Hopper is cynical, even in this first episode, he still, like, even though he's wary with what Joyce is saying, he still does his job. He goes out, he investigates, he looks for the kid, he asks around, and he starts to realize that, yes, this is a little bit more serious than he initially thought. And I like that he treats Joyce with respect, even though he is trying to calm her down. I think he's actually quite good with her, and I think their relationship has quite a journey over seasons 1 and 2. But I really like his establishment. And then of course Joyce Byers is just like so precious. I mean, you get this, like, when we first meet her, you can tell that she's a harried single mother. Her son is making breakfast, she's rushing off to work, and then just the protectiveness and the mama bear side that comes out of her when Will goes missing. And Joyce gets a lot of criticism, or she did initially, for being hysterical, but I'm like, her son is missing. She's a single mother and her son has disappeared. Like, I'd be hysterical too. And I think that Winona Ryder just does such a great job.
A bit too hard to like just show off her acting credentials a little bit, but no, I mean, over time I've sort of changed my view on that. I think she is very good. I think she's very frantic, and you get the desperation, and over time, yeah, I've sort of changed my sort of view on that. I mean, when I watched it, I did first time, I did actually think she was being like the performance was being a little bit over.
Oh, okay.
But
I
no.
am predisposed to love Winona just because I have loved Winona Ryder since I was like 10 years old. She's probably like one of my favorite actresses of all time. So I went into this knowing she was in it and just knowing that, oh, plus fun fact, I share her birthday. So that's very cool.
Yeah, that's a good birthday to share. Yeah.
I think so. So I just love Winona.
Also, I think not only is it a great sort of choice because of the actress being good, but to me, this is a very known sort of show. So I think part of the casting is because Winona Ryder originally became a star in like the 80s.
In the 80s.
The later 80s, obviously. But, I think that's very deliberate. I think they wanted someone who was sort of in like big movies in the 80s and had that sort of pedigree. See, I think maybe called Nancy because of the Nancy character from Nightmare on Elm Street.
From Nightmare on Elm Street? Yeah, that's
because
probably
if you look at her, she does look quite similar as well to her. So
has a similar kind of grit and pluck as well.
Yeah.
Proactive.
Yeah, definitely. So I was going to ask you actually, what do you think of Nancy? Based on this episode, obviously.
I think in this episode, she's a very typical teenage girl. I think in this episode, and a very typical teenage girl in the 80s. You know, like I said, she feels like Nancy's story almost feels a bit like a coming of age. You know, she's at a crossroads. She's got her first serious boyfriend. She's obviously serious about studying. I think she and Mike have some great sibling moments. You know, like.
So
they have some fun, like, snarking moments between them. And I think Nancy in this first episode, I think we're not supposed to think that there's much more to her. And then as the season goes on, we start to discover that there is. You know, in this first episode, she is very much presented, like I said, it's just your typical teenage girl. She's got school, she's got a boyfriend, she's on the phone, she's not really paying attention to her sibling or what's really happening. But I think that we're supposed to think that of her so that she can then subvert our expectations as the season goes on. I have to admit, Nancy is not one of my favorite characters. I do think she has a nice arc over some of the seasons, but I also think that she does have some big flaws. But again, watching it now, being older, I'll probably find her more sympathetic than I did when I first watched the series. But I think in this first episode, she's kind of a very like I said, very stereotypical kind of teenage girl, so that later on we can be surprised by her actions.
Actually quite smart and quite sort of, into studying and stuff, because you could sort of read it as she's portrayed a little bit as she's meant to be a bit uptight or a bit shallow.
Yeah.
So, but I do actually like them with that. She's actually into her studies and quite passionate about that, because that's a nice version. Steve is a classic example of that. So version with him, I don't think you could have ever imagined
expected.
Would grow as he does later on, because I sort of saw him and assumed he would be like a one-season character, really, which I think was the original plan. I think I've heard this, and originally they thought he might only be around for one season. And
wouldn't surprise me.
It was over time they sort of thought, well, we might have something with this guy, so we'll give him a longer role.
Yeah.
The only sort of weak link in this first episode, I think, from the cast and characters, I think is Jonathan. I'm not so keen on him. Like, the character I think is okay. It's just I don't think the actor's the best.
No.
A little bit one note.
And he's
in a way.
Yeah, he kind of just seems to be there so that Joyce can have a support system, like he's basically just Will's brother. Like he doesn't seem to have much beyond that. Nancy is Mike's sister, but she also has her own storyline and her own personality and her own like thread going on. Whereas Jonathan is just kind of like, he's just Will's brother, like that's that's pretty much it. And I agree that the actor's not really the best. So I do agree that he's a bit of a weak link. And unfortunately, I think he continues to be a bit of a weak link in the series. And you can definitely see that early on. But I do want to talk about just one character, one little minor character from this episode who's never seen again, but is just so beautiful. And that's Benny. We need to talk about Benny the diner guy, who's the first person to show Elle kindness. Like, just Benny is just like, because Elle, obviously, we don't know anything about in this episode. All we know is that she's a scared child. You know, we don't even know where she's come from. We just see her appear and go to the diner, and just the way Benny is so beautiful and so gentle with her and just so lovely. And of course, he ends up with a bullet in the brain because we can't have nice things. But I have to say, that scene with the song White Rabbit, that's a fantastic scene. Just such a great scene. And again, it's one of those scenes that gives you a bit of mystery. You're like, holy crap, what the hell is going on? Where did this girl come from? And obviously we get a little bit of hint of her powers in that scene because she turns the fan off with her mind. But just like, Benny deserves to go down to like the Hall of Fame of like best one-shot characters, because he's such a great character. He manages, in just like the 2 or 3 scenes that he has, he manages to really show you how caring he is and kind of that gentle giant thing. So I have to give a special shout out to Benny, because we all love Benny the diner guy, the first person to ever show Elle like some kindness, and you can tell that she really needs that. And then of course the episode ends with the boys finding her in the woods, and we have that brilliant hook that you were talking about.
I mean, great hook to end the episode, because it's sort of an example where it, like the episode with things like that, it just gives you enough for a hook, but not too much, because we obviously know very little about Elle, apart from the fact that the scientist guys are after her, and obviously you've got Matthew Modine, who plays like the head of the science. There's a lot of great creepy. Like. Yeah, he's always quite creepy, I find, but there's lots of like great guest stars throughout Stranger Things. So we've got a lot of like good guest stars, and there's a lot of, like you were talking about, sort of smaller characters, you know, who are really enjoyable and sort of steal scenes. I think I've definitely seen that actor who plays Benny in other things as well. He looked quite fun. But he's did a good job, you know, for the couple of scenes he was in, definitely. And obviously a bit of stakes created by him, you know, being killed off. It obviously sells the threat and stuff. And some good intrigue set up with what's happening with Elle.
So well directed as well, this episode. Like, the direction in this episode is just brilliant. It's beautiful. It's done so well. There's so much great tension and atmosphere. And like I said, they do really well to emulate those adventure movies from the 80s. So when you watch it, it almost feels like, I remember when I first watched it, it almost feels like you're watching something you've already watched, but you haven't. You know, it creates that feeling of familiarity and comfort. Like I said, I really thought of like Stand By Me and E.T. and the Goonies and stuff. So I think that just everything about it, and the score, we will talk more about the score as the series goes on. But that synth score that sounds like it's right out of an 80s movie, it's just it's fantastic.
And those opening credits as well, the synth is so good, and I love the visuals of it and the neon type styling, which again is an 80s sort of nod. So
and the way they make it look like a VHS.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's so, you know, every time it comes on, I just get pumped, sort of thing. It's so good. And there's some great music as well on the soundtrack. I mean, this is really loaded with, you know, sort of big like 80s style songs. So
fantastic first episode.
Yeah, the big thing in the first episode in this case is setting up the characters and their world, and setting up a little bit of intrigue with obviously the disappearance of Will, but also the introduction of Elle and the mystery over exactly who she is and what's going on with her. So really good, strong opening. It hits the ground running very much. So definitely. That's Stranger Things episode 1. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. I will actually say quick shout out to Becca, who's one of our followers, one of the subscribers, because I know she absolutely loves Stranger Things. This is one of her favourite shows, so these reviews certainly go out to her. I hope you enjoy them, Becca. And yeah, do let us know your thoughts on this episode in the comments below. Also, if you've got any stories, any memory of when you first saw Stranger Things back in 2016, then please let us know as well. And we'll return soon with episode 2 review. But Rachel, if you want to promote your channel before we go.
Yeah, sure, guys. Just follow me at Rachel McDonald. Video essays covering movies and TV shows. My Twitter and my Tumblr are also on my YouTube account, and Keith usually puts a link into the description. So come and follow me everywhere.
Thanks, guys, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.